Economy Committee. Some members will be attending this morning's meeting via Starleaf, and we don't have any witnesses today, so no one will be attending via Starleaf. And the meeting will be broadcast live when open to the public, and a recording will be made available on the committee's web pages on the Assembly website. And just to remind members to mute their devices when they're not speaking. Obviously this is one of our short meetings today, so we have to be out of this room by 12. And I'd just like to welcome Mike Nesbitt to his first meeting of the committee, and just put on record members' thanks to John Stewart for his work on the committee, and to wish him well in his new role as well. So moving on then to item number 1, which is apologies. We have apologies this morning from Sinead McLaughlin, Stuart Dixon and Mervyn Story, unless members are aware of any other apologies. Okay. So moving on then, we can't do minutes.
Chair, what we can do is move on to the items where it's more discussion and there aren't decision-making elements early on. And then hopefully we will get a 5th member so that we can make decisions.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go to item number 3, which is Chair's business, and just run through the few things that are in there. There is correspondence from the Speaker to all MLAs at page 14 regarding Assembly recess and recalls, setting out the rules around recalls and other matters, and asking that recalls are requested only in exceptional circumstances. So that's just for us to note. Then moving on, there's an invitation from the 6 FE colleges at page 17 to an online event, FE for Me, a celebration of further education in NI, which takes place today from 1 to 2. And again, that's just to note.
Chair, we have Sinead from the team is going to sit in on that, hopefully, and we'll come back with the feedback from that.
Thank you. And then there is correspondence from the Clerking and Member Support Office at page 18 regarding a training session taking place for members on protecting your social media reputation. There are 3 dates available: Friday the 11th, Thursday the 17th and Friday the 18th of June, and just to ask members to email the CAMS office if they wish to attend those sessions. And then the final thing under Chair's business today is at page 4 of your table papers. There is a copy of an oral statement from the Education Minister yesterday on the final report and action plan by the expert panel on educational underachievement. And just to highlight that the report, entitled A Fair Start, has identified 8 key areas within which it has identified 47 actions for change. And the key areas are redirecting the focus to early years, champion emotional health and well-being, ensuring the relevance and appropriateness of curriculum and assessment, promoting a whole community approach to education, maximising boys' potential, driving forward teachers' professional learning, supporting the professional learning and well-being of school leadership, and ensuring interdepartmental collaboration and delivery. And just to remind members, the committee has previously discussed the importance of a whole education continuum, and that what goes on in school impacts what goes on in further and higher education, which are obviously within our committee's remit. So that's just to note at this point, and the committee will obviously want to consider any Department of Education action plan that is brought forward at a later date. So moving on then to where, Peter?
We can't do 4, Chair, because we require agreement on that. So if we want to move then to 5, the reform of youth training.
Yep. So at page 52 of your pack, there is a written briefing on reform of youth training at page 52 of your pack. There is a clerk's memo at page 45 of table papers. And just to remind members that the committee was briefed at the last meeting on the department's review of level 4 and 5 provision and their linkage into level 6. This written briefing highlights the work that has been done at levels 1 to 3. So Peter, you're going to take us through this.
Yeah, Chair, the committee will be aware of what's going on at levels 4 and 5. We had a briefing from officials on that last week. So that's effectively everything that is equivalent to A-levels right through to foundation degrees, to NVQs, HNDs, HNCs and so on. What this looks at is levels 1 to 3, which is basically the GCSE equivalent and up to A-level, and including an equivalent to A-level. So what the department has done is it's taken its strategy generating our success from 2015 and has reviewed the separate elements 1, 2 and 3 within that. Members will recall that the committee has engaged very heavily with the FE colleges. The feedback we've had from them and we've had from employers is that a lot of the qualifications aren't well understood. Employers don't really know what they do. Young people aren't aware of them. The career service isn't having equal access to all students in all schools. So in many schools, young people really are only aware of A-levels and a university progression. They have no awareness of other pathways. So part of the review was to try and make those clearer, simplify them, reduce the kind of cluttered landscape of qualifications. Members will also recall that the FE colleges have commented on how they deal with over 80 awarding bodies in terms of vocational and professional qualifications, 81 of which, I think it's 87 altogether, 81 of which are based in England and don't necessarily take cognizance of our local term times. So we have 5 weeks less to complete to the end of the summer than schools in or colleges in England and Wales. Scotland has a very different system; it's very separate. So it's trying to look at how we reduce all of that complication and bring forward something that is much more relevant for young people and employers, and they can much more clearly understand. So what they've wanted to do was try and introduce professional and technical qualifications as a standalone, clearly marked, equal pathway to doing A-levels and then going on to university, that sort of academic route. So what they've done is they've focused a lot of effort, particularly at level 2, and they're developing what's called a traineeship. Traineeship will come live in September, and what it'll effectively do is replace the level 2 of the old Training for Success programme. Training for Success contracts end in July and obviously won't be renewed. So this new system called traineeship will replace that level 2 Training for Success qualification. What the department has found is that there isn't great stickability, if I can use that word, with Training for Success. So you're only really seeing about 65% of young people actually making it to the end. They've piloted this new traineeship model of level 2, and the stickability, if I can use that word again, was 88% through to completion. And the award has been considered by employers and young people to be much more clearly employable. So employers understand what the elements are, they know what's going on, and they are more likely to employ someone with this qualification. So the pilots have been incredibly positive, and now it's going to be rolled out from September. The big issue, and the issue that the committee may want to reflect on, is that roughly 60+% of the level 2 was already being done in colleges, but obviously there were alternative providers. The way that the business case for this traineeship has been designed, and what the Department for Finance has approved for value for money, is that the whole level 2 now takes place in FE colleges. So there may be an issue there around what alternative providers are losing and whether they're able to pick up at other levels, which we can go into as well, and the committee can decide how it wants to take that forward. Initially, the opening of this in September will have, there's going to be approximately just shy of 30 occupational areas for this to go into. The core level 2 frameworks will also include GCSE English and Maths level. So this effectively will give people a vocational route to A-level or other qualifications at levels 4 and 5. So the programme covers key elements. A vocational qualification equivalent to 3 GCSEs in the chosen occupational area. Education qualifications, essential skills, literacy, numeracy, ITC, with the option of pursuing GCSE qualifications in English and mathematics. Work-based learning and additional professional qualifications. So they're going to be coming out with something a lot more identifiable and a lot easier to understand, that has the academic core, but also has a level of professional and technical qualification. There will be work-ready experience and so on. While the 16 to 24 age group is being specifically targeted, this will be open to all age groups who are not already in employment. So it replaces other elements of training for older age groups, and we'll get on to the all-age apprenticeship in a minute. So initially, come September, there'll be 1,850 places available in 22 occupational areas. September 2022, that will rise to 4,500 places in 38 occupational areas. So that effectively, if you like, will be full rollout of occupational areas with further capacity for increased places. The traineeship programme feeds into the department's economic recovery action plan, but also its 10x economy vision. So it has been designed so that it gives employers a number of issues that they've been asking for. So it prioritises skills that are most economically relevant. It offers breadth beyond skills of specific job roles. So while you study towards particular occupational areas, you also have that English, maths, ICT that people who are doing GCSE will have. The advanced manufacturing and engineering, there'll be agri-tech, there'll be life and health sciences, and there'll be financial services. So it aims at all those occupational areas that the Minister's already highlighted are in short supply within our economy and where we have existing skills gaps. Members will recall from the skills micro-inquiry that the committee did that these were issues that were identified. Qualifications that employers didn't understand, qualifications that weren't work-ready or occupationally relevant and weren't in the areas they needed to be. So this Level 2 traineeship seeks to address that. So the rollout is from September. Training for Success, which it replaces, hasn't had the best reputation. So that scheme will end and this will basically take over. There will be a qualification level to get onto this course based on GCSEs that young people have already done in schools. So essentially they have to get 4 GCSEs at grade G, including English and Maths at grade F. So that hopefully would mean that a lot of young people who maybe GCSE hasn't really worked out for, because those wouldn't be the passing A to C grades that we talk about, will be able to get onto this, and effectively it will provide them with that qualification that they need to go on to further study. Members will also recall that the committee's been briefed on how around a third of young people here leave school without any qualification. They don't have those 5 GCSEs A to C. This is hopefully a way to address that gap, and we now have 5 members, so we can start making decisions. And Chair, what I'll do is, if members are content, I'll continue on with Level 1 and 3. So Level 1 is, if you like, core level that would be effectively seen as getting people into the way of qualifications of working in colleges so that they can then progress on to the Level 2 GCSE equivalent. So again, the department has been taking pilots and reviewing the original Generating Our Success Level 1 provision, and they have redesigned it. They aren't entirely there in terms of a full replacement for Level 1. So what they'll be rolling out as an interim in September is something they're calling Skills for Life and Work, not to be confused with about 3 or 4 other brands that had a very similar title. This is Skills for Life and Work, not Skills for Life, not Skills for Work, which are other programs, Skills for Life and Work. So this will be awarded to private tender as well as 4 of the 6 FE colleges who will offer it, and a service level agreement with them is already in process. And as I say, the programme will launch in September. The business case for it looks at about 1,500 young people starting each year, and the qualifications will build up personal and employability skills, and it's really that stepping stone, as I say, to Level 2 to get onto the traineeship programmes. And also move into other areas of study at FE colleges and potentially get into an apprenticeship. So, if you like, it's the level even below the GCSE level that we've just talked about at Level 2. So it too has key elements. An individualised personal training plan for every participant, which hasn't necessarily been the case before. There's been a tendency for one size fits all. This will allow specific skills gaps to be identified for each participant. The delivery model is flexible and needs to be because of that individualisation. So, young people will get that specific training and skills base that is right for them. There is also likely to be a proportion of the course offered online, which means that young people won't always be in college and they'll be able to work from other locations and so on. If they don't have great broadband, again, hopefully we'll be able to use the library estate for that. There will be learning programmes on personal and social development, employability, professional and technical skills, and the essential skills we talked about before, English, Maths, ICT, leading to regulated qualifications at entry level 1, but potentially also shading into level 2 depending on how well they've done. There'll be a personalised targeting of qualifications levels. So again, a qualifications framework will be designed for each individual participant, and there'll be world of work activities and a work placement when the participant has reached a certain level, as well as a participant training allowance, and that's obviously the same for level 2, which again is a key incentive for young people to get onto this, is the fact that they will be paid an allowance. We haven't had an amount yet, but that will come with further information and when we bring in officials to brief on a final product. Then turning to apprenticeships NI, that members will remember was effectively the redesign of modern apprenticeships which happened back in 2012. Seems much longer ago than that. Those are now being called Apprenticeships NI 21, shortened to APPS NI 21, which brings up all sorts of associations, but we'll not go there. This will mirror existing provision, but also, again, as I said, with the level 1 and the level 2 will be aligned to the ERAP and the 10X economy. Members will also be aware that the 10X economy suite of papers is still coming out, so we're not entirely sure what that full picture will look like. The contracts have been awarded for cohorts 1 and 2, so that's entry this September, entry next September, working through the system, and there is a possibility of that contract then being awarded for 2 further cohorts in 23-24 and 24-25. So essentially provision has been put in place for the next 4 to 6 years. Obviously the apprenticeship takes longer than a year. Committee has also advocated very strongly for all age apprenticeships, and those are now being introduced for those over 25. So this apprenticeships NI 21 will be targeted primarily at 16 to 24. They will get 100% of provision funded. Then the 25 plus all age apprenticeship will have 50% funding covered. So it's not on the same level, but it's much more significant than the provision there was before. And I imagine the committee will want to talk about seeking 100% funding provision for that going forward, particularly looking forward into the autumn, potentially when furlough ends, and we're looking at more than likely significant rises in unemployment. The length of the apprenticeship is roughly 4 to 5 years, so further funding will need to be secured by the department. It's only got funding for the first year and outlined funding for the second. And it's seen by the Minister and the department as a key tool for getting people back into work following the impact of COVID, following the end of furlough, following the end of support schemes, which are all likely to be coinciding in the autumn time. Hopefully the High Street Stimulus Scheme will come in there and play some role in job generation, but again, the department is looking to put in place other things. So moving then to level 3, and there will be a new Advanced Technical Award. We will provide at some stage going forward a schematic for this, because I appreciate the new names are very much like the old names, and it is helpful to have a diagram. But once we've got to a point where the department have finalised everything and bring them in for a briefing, we'll have that provided. So this again will feed into the ERAP and the 10X economy vision. And the key objective here is to address long-standing productivity challenges and gaps in our skills offering. that members are well aware of, that the committee has identified and that we've heard a number of times from employer interaction. So the award will build on the Level 2 traineeship and provide an alternative pathway to learners who wish to pursue a vocational route to higher skills, education and employment. So it provides another pathway other than the apprenticeship, but is equally seen as potentially leading into university or leading into management within a number of sectors. The comment the department has made with this is that this Level 3 technical Advanced Technical Award will feed significantly into the increase of proportion of individuals achieving Level 3, 4 and 5 qualifications. I suppose, Chair, all of these programmes are aimed at creating that continuum the committee has talked about before, where jump on at Level 1, there's a pathway to Level 2 and Level 3, or jump on at 2, Level 3 and onwards again, jump on at Level 3, and 4, 5 and 6 are opened up as well. So members may want to give views so far, and obviously, as I say, this has all kind of landed on us fairly quickly. We will seek to get a briefing from the department. I would suggest members in September, once everything is pinned down, service levels agreements are in place, contracts are all awarded, and we have a full picture of how this will all work and how it will interact, and that wonderful schematic to explain it all. Chair, but if members want to make any comments thus far.
Yeah. Peter, thanks for going through that for us. You have highlighted a few of the issues certainly that I wanted to bring up, and if we go back first of all to the Level 2 and the issue of it moving solely into the FE colleges, we were contacted last year when the new traineeship was kind of postponed for the year, so it might be worth getting some views around that from the training providers, just in respect of their thoughts about it being delivered solely within FE. And my initial thinking around it would be, you know, those young people who are slightly further from education, who have been failed by the school system, and who, you know, FE might not be a suitable route for them even once they have come through a Level 1 with the training provider, if that's their pathway. So I think that certainly that would be something we might like to get some feedback around.
Chair, if members agree, we pursue that. We already have contacts with the alternative providers. They have their own forum, so I imagine they'll have a fair bit they want to tell us on this. So if members are content, we go ahead and pursue that.
Thank you, Peter. Then the learning online one, Peter, as well, that you mentioned.
Yeah, there's scope in Level 1 for that, and you might recall, Chair, in the informal meeting with the FE colleges, they've talked about trying to preserve that hybrid model of offering courses online to students with specific needs, and you'll recall as well from the University of Ulster informal meeting, they have a neurodiversity group that is looking at how young people on the autism spectrum respond better to those online lectures that they can download and then send in questions rather than being in the live auditorium with, you know, potentially tens or dozens of other people. So it is something they're looking at. It hasn't really been pinned down. It's a little vague at the minute.
And my thinking around it would be people who have access to broadband issues, and also we know of some schemes that have been run out here through Department of Education during COVID, and also in England through the Department for Education there, whereby data is made available to people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to make sure that young people do have access to learning online. So that might be something that we want to see if the department has given any thought around.
Chair, if members are content, we'll put that into the DALO readout for comment from the department as to how they think that'll be managed.
And then I suppose just the final thing for me before bringing other people in would be around, see the Level 3 Advanced Technical Award, which is equivalent to kind of A-levels. What's the progression there? Because A-levels, obviously you can go straight into a degree. If you complete the Level 3, do you have to go Level 4 or 5 before you could go to a degree?
Sure, that's the intention, that level 3 would lead automatically into 4 and 5, and potentially some provisional level 3 will start you on level 4 if you progress to a certain point. The department's intention is that there will be a completely smooth transition. As members will be aware, if a young person progresses on to level 4 and 5, they may well be able to complete a foundation degree that allows them to enter university at second year. So the continuum is there, but it also allows employers to understand that they have an A-level equivalent that is in a specific occupational area that will allow them to go straight into the workplace without necessarily having a great deal of further training, but the continuum to 4 and 5 is there.
Okay, it might be useful for a schematic.
Yeah, that's where we need to go with this, Chair. As I say, this was sent to us by the department on fairly short notice, and ideally we want a briefing on all of this once detail is pinned down.
And sorry, I did say it was my final point, but the one, I see the level 2, so it seems to be post GCSE despite being GCSE level, is that right? Because it says you need to have grades F and G.
That's going to be an age situation. So the assumption is that all young people will be in school to 16 until they can officially leave, and that they will have at least done GCSE. This means that there's an entry requirement, but as the paper says, it's 4 at GCSE grade G, Maths and English at grade F, which to me then would suggest that actually you're looking for 6, but I think it does mean 4, 2 at G, Maths and English at F.
Okay.
But again, I think that's useful to get clarification on a schematic for that. The paper doesn't go into great depth.
Yeah, so these courses won't be available to GCSE level students. It's post GCSE.
That's the understanding, Chair, but I suppose the assumption would be that if you go for and the committee has talked about this, the big reform of the education continuum, you look at 14 provision onwards, and that's where the 14 to 19 strategy comes in. Members will recall that the Department for Economy and Department for Education are looking at a 14 to 19 strategy, and the Department for Education is currently working on another department, but obviously there are those that are going to be working on an independent review of education. So this is where that would become relevant. If you have alternative provision at 14, then this would be brought in as a replacement for GCSE. That's what I'd said at the outset, where the Department for the Economy has this kind of provision, but is limited to offering post-16, because obviously the Department for Education is up to 16, and this is where the two don't necessarily integrate properly. So I suppose the department's thinking, and again, it'll be interesting to hear what officials say, but the hint here is that they are forward thinking that this would actually be brought down to people going into this at 14 rather than doing GCSE. It effectively would become a replacement. What they're basically banking on now is that most young people will have done some GCSE, leave school at 16. Then if they've met a minimum requirement, they will go into this. It does feel like duplication, but it's where those two remits hit. That's where the impasse is, and that's what 14 to 19 needs to look at.
Okay, well, it would be useful to get some clarity around that, and the cross-departmental piece is going to be important in that respect. John O'Dowd, can we bring John into the spotlight, please, Tony?
Yep. He's in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Peter, and fair play to Peter for trying to unravel that briefing from the department, because I don't know about the schematic, but I need to lay down in the dark room after trying to work out what the paper's telling me, and in fairness, Peter has given a very good presentation on it. But as someone who is used to working with civil service jargon, can't understand it, how are employers and employees and parents going to understand it going into the future? So if I was to make an appeal to the department, I would ask them to come back and put it into a context which is understandable to those people who it is being presented to. And the most important people it's being presented to is young people, employers, and their parents, who are still the main source of careers guidance moving forward. It may well be a very good idea, but I just don't know. So I'll wait on the briefing from the officials to see if they can unpackage it. And as I say, Peter's done a very, very good job on it there, in fairness to him. But the point I was going to make is this. This, from what I understand of it, fits in with the ministerial statement yesterday and the presentation of the Fair Start report. Because it's how we measure success in academia, firstly. And we currently measure that through what's known as 5 good GCSEs, A star to C grade, which is fair enough. But young people develop at different stages and will be interested in different styles and types of learning and how they develop the skills to present themselves to the workplace. And if we get it, and yesterday's report talked a lot about early years, which is fair enough. But the danger in that is if you concentrate on early years, you forget about young people 14, 16, 16 to 18, etc. And then you lose a generation. So this report this strategy has to fit in to the Department of Education strategies. So the point I'm trying to make is that this may be a good way of encouraging young people to obtain skill sets which are useful to employers, but that remains to be seen. I am concerned and continue to be concerned that certain schools, and it's largely grammar schools, won't allow careers advisors in to discuss these things because young people in some grammar schools don't do as well as the school would have expected GCSE level, and they're asked or encouraged to leave to go elsewhere, and this may be the career pathway for them because as I said at the start of my discussion here, is that young people learn in different ways, and how we measure success should be, but measuring success in education should be that we have create or help to encourage a young person to be everything they can. That's the measure of education. That's the measure of success. And if we can encourage young people to be everything they can, then they become invaluable, or they become valuable employees and contributors to society. So it's not so much a question as a comment, though. My hope is that the department comes back with a document that parents and employers and potential employees can understand. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Chair, if I can just come back on a couple of points. The paper talks about having talked to stakeholders, having worked on this and done the pilots with employers, with the colleges and with the unions. So theoretically there is that read across of key stakeholders where they have input into making this understandable for them. And I think that's another thing the committee is going to need to pin down, is whether or not the employers particularly get this, understand it, and are ready for its rollout. So that might be another action, Chair, I would suggest to the committee, is if we contact our employer stakeholders and ask if they understand what's going on, if they've been briefed, if they know what to expect, because this will be going live from September. The other thing was the careers advice. Interestingly, members will be aware of this. It's come into briefings on occasion from the department that careers advice has been done online during COVID, and that has actually often involved parents who are more likely now to be effectively in the room when this is happening. And the feedback from the career services, there's been kind of a lot of light bulb moments where parents are realising that A-levels are not the only alternative, that university is not the only alternative. So, Chair, what Mr O'Dowd's saying is really key to that 14 to 19 piece, which part of the long title is, career strategy, where young people get that information, but more importantly, their parents do, because the parents are going to be huge influencers at that stage, and not all schools, as Mr O'Dowd says, are providing access. If there was more of the mandate left, it's an issue that I know the committee would want to pursue in terms of potentially looking at legislation. That's been discussed in the previous mandate that was cut short. So it's a real issue. The career service know it's an issue. The department knows it's an issue. But again, it's where the two remits, economy and education, meet and don't necessarily gel or dovetail. And I appreciate the complexity of this. Members will be highly aware that the Department for the Economy has produced more papers in the last couple of months than I think it has in the previous 2-3 years that all theoretically align, which I think is one of the reasons why this sort of paper popped up, and we really didn't have sufficient organisation or time to get a briefing done. Also, the fact that we have a lot of questions that I think need to be answered, and we'd want those done in a briefing as well. So I take on board everything Mr. O'Dowd has said, and we'll try and feedback as much of that in the Dallow readout as we possibly can.
Thanks, Peter. Mike?
Chair, thank you. And let me start positively by saying I agree with John O'Dowd. I think our focus has to be on creating the environment and the architecture that allows each individual to become the person they are supposed to be. And if we achieve that, then those individuals will help transform our economy, and equally economic activity will transform the lives of the people we are here to serve. I am struck that we're talking the day after the publication of Fair Start, and two of the comments that really leapt off the page to me in that report were that we need a culture change in how we view academic and vocational education, and that we lack a parity of esteem and a lack of understanding of the different values of academic and vocational education and training. So on that basis, what we're discussing here, I think, is incredibly important, but I also think it's incredibly complicated as somebody coming to it fresh. Now, the former is obviously a good thing, not so much the latter. So I guess my question is, as Peter says, we now have skills for life and work being proposed, but we already have skills for your life and skills for work. So if I'm a 16-year-old coming out of school, am I supposed to have the capacity to know which of those three is the one for me? And if I'm an employer or a potential employer, am I supposed to know which one of the three I'm supposed to be looking for in the potential employee that I might be interviewing? It just seems to me it's too confusing terrain. And as Peter said, there's maybe 87 providers across the UK. Does that mean it's like universities where some have a reputation, they're very good for the arts, or somewhere else is the place to go if you want to be a doctor, somewhere else is the place to go on another specific, which would run against, I think, the stated ambition of these awards being nationally and internationally recognised. So I don't think there are answers to be had around this table, but certainly I think these are questions that need to be put to the department, because, as I say, that this is about the future lives of our young people.
Chair, it might also be worth flagging it. We have SIA in on the 23rd. This is obviously going to have an impact on the regulation of the landscape of qualifications. We've had a preliminary discussion with the interim chief executive, who agrees with the colleges that this landscape is way crowded and is looking for ways to, I suppose, moderate the number of bodies that are used. Fortunately, the interim chief executive has come from that English system, knows it, knows the people, and I think has a good understanding of how that can be done, but also will be able to talk to us about what their understanding of all of this is, how this will fit into the system, and where it fits into alignment with, for example, the 14 to 19 strategy, with the skills strategy that's out for consultation, with the various parts of the 10x economy that it's to be linked to, with the Economic Recovery Action Plan, which it's to be linked to. It's a lot of detail, a lot of documentation, and as Mr. Nesbitt has said, for young people to be able to access this without necessarily getting the careers advice input that they need is going to be very difficult. And you know, they are going to be looking to their parents for advice, and parents are going to be looking at this and thinking, this is nothing like what I remember. I have no idea what's going on. So although the department has talked about clearer branding, I would suggest, Chair, that maybe less fancy branding, call it what it is. It's a level 2 whatever, it's a level 3 whatever, it's a level 1 whatever, rather than creating confusion by a slightly different title that is very much like a couple of other titles that have been combined, but it's not quite that. And it is hard to understand, Chair, and I think that was part of today was about giving members a chance to discuss this. We rarely get the chance to pause and actually discuss these kinds of things, and it also follows on from 4 and 5 presentation last week from the department. So those are all key issues that we can feed back to the department, but I think the department will agree with all of the information we've had from them. They know what the issues are, but there's still going to be that difficult bottom line of, without buy-in from Department for Education and the schools and the system there, the Department for the Economy is left at 16 plus, trying to fill gaps, support and facilitate those who have not had the best experience at school. It hasn't really worked for them. So the review of education, as members have pointed out, really needs to be a key part of this overall picture and fit in with the systems that the Economy Department is setting in place, but at the minute they're only kicking in at 16 after all of those years previously.
Chair, just a final comment, if I may. Paragraph 28 suggests the department was on track to award the contracts at the end of May. So could we perhaps ask if that has been done, how many and who were awarded contracts? Thank you.
Can we bring Gary in? He's in the spotlight. Yeah. Go ahead, Gary.
There, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Say thanks to Peter as well for trying to, I suppose, give us a breakdown of exactly what has been said within the paper. I think that was very useful. Obviously, this is a very important piece of work which we need to ensure that it is done right. Peter has also mentioned, the clerk has also mentioned, obviously, the fact that there are a lot of papers and there's a lot of strategies within the department at this point in time. That's obviously a good thing. However, it is important that, with these strategies, that there seem to be a joint up approach, and that we deliver, I suppose, on what the strategies are intended to do. I do have a concern, however. I think that we need to ensure that the employers will get this, that the employers will understand exactly what's going to be entailed, but also, I suppose, most importantly, that the young people, and I raised this last week when we discussed the level 4 and level 5 provisions around, how do we reach those most disadvantaged within our communities. It ties in very much with the report that was launched yesterday by the Education Minister in relation to the educational underachievement piece. This all needs to be joined up. I remain to be convinced, and we need to see how that's going to be done. My suggestion was that, Peter, I don't know if there's any information in terms of how the department is engaging with the Department for Education and other departments as well. You mentioned that this will be going live in September. I take your point as well around, how people understand this. It can't just be, fancy graphics and branding. It needs to be very clear. Young people need to know, what their options are. That needs to go at every level throughout our systems. So it's just that was the point, just around the engagement piece, and I think it is useful, or would be useful, if we get a briefing from the department sooner rather than later, whether that's informally or formally. I think it would be useful that we do that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gary. And I'm just picking up on Gary's point, and we asked this of officials last week in the level 4 and 5, is the tie-in with DFC, particularly around the employability piece, and if there is that joined up work going on there as well as with education.
Chair, I think that's probably I think as Mr. Middleton has said, that's the briefing that really is going to be key, is not just how the DFE elements fit together, but how they fit with what education's doing and what communities is doing. So what we'll try and do is, I think the best discussion may be an informal one, because that allows a different time scale and also allows much more interaction than a formal committee meeting. So we might look to do that sooner rather than later. So I'd said we'd see on the 23rd. We actually have them on the 30th. But but hopefully they also will be able to give that input. But we'll communicate with all the stakeholders mentioned by members to see what their understanding of this is, because I am just really conscious of the fact it's now June. This goes live, all 3 levels go live in September, and the level 1 is only an interim qualification, so there will be a replacement, but when is that going to happen? And there is a lot going on there. It's a really, really busy landscape. So I think, yeah, all of that clarification, Chair, we will try and pin down as much as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
John here, may I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The paragraph 7 of the paper, it talks about who the department engaged with as it developed the proposals. How often did the department come to the committee to brief us on their thinking, as their direction they were going in terms of this policy?
Chair, if I can step in there, what we've had from the department are maybe 3 or 4 general briefings of, I suppose, skills and wider context. They've indicated that they would be looking at different levels, but in terms of, say, for example, this level 1, 2 and 3, this is the first time we've seen this level of detail. And also with the 4 and 5 briefing last week, that was the biggest amount of detail we've had on that specific as well. I think that the department has done the pilots, but part of our problem has been our missing time and COVID. The pilots have been going on through 2018 and 19, so the normal run of things would have been bringing that to committee at the time, but we effectively missed all that coming back in January 2020, and we did have a number of planned briefings on this before COVID came, and members, we'll see this later on in the meeting, but members would also, I would draw their attention to the department's June monitoring paper, where they are still carrying a really significant number of vacancies in a lot of business areas. So I think this has been a perfect storm, if you like, of the Assembly's hiatus, COVID, and the amount of workforce that has been switched to COVID. So they've just about managed to get these through for a September start and decided to kind of go ahead with that. But Chair, I totally take on board everything members are saying in terms of, I suppose, suddenness. But there really has been a perfect storm around this. The concern, I think, that members have echoed is that the audience, the consumer, if you like, the young people and their parents are going to be the key audience here, and what do they know and how do they understand it? So it'll be useful to get feedback from the colleges as well as to what they're doing around presenting this to young people, and also from the Careers Advice Service in terms of what young people already know. So if members are content, we'd also like to write to them and ask what exactly they're telling people, what exactly are young people in the picture on with this. We now know these are going to be launched in September. What do young people know?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And we do know, I think, Peter, and you can keep me right in this, that the Students' Union were involved in this piece of work.
Chair.
So it might be also useful to hear from them, their views around it.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. Okay, if people are happy enough, will we go back and agree our minutes?
Yes, Chair, let's go back to decisions.
Okay, so going back then to item number 2, which is our draft minutes, which are at page 5 of your pack for the meeting held on the 26th of May, and just to ask members if they're content that those minutes are an accurate reflection of the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, if we just get an agreement to note all the chair's business items.
Yeah, so that was 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4. There were actually only 3.1, 2 and 4 had actions to note, so if members are content with those.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on. We'll do the LCM report.
To the LCM.
So we're going to go to item number 4 now, which is the report on the Legislative Consent Memorandum on the UK Government Rating Coronavirus and Directors Disqualification Dissolve Companies Bill. So there's a clerk's memo at page 22 The LCM bill is at page 25. The Draft Economy Committee report on the LCM is at page 33, and then there is the responses from FSB at page 46, Newry Chamber at page 47, the Labour Relations Agency at page 48, Deloitte at page 49, NICIC 2 at page 50. There is a copy of the bill itself at page 14 of table papers, and the explanatory memorandum at page 24 of table papers. And just to remind members, at last week's meeting on the 26th of May, the committee considered the LCM and a draft motion from the Minister in relation to the Rating Coronavirus Directors Disqualification Bill. The LCM was led in the Business Office on the 20th of May, following the bill being introduced in the House of Commons on the 12th of May. The committee had written to relevant stakeholders requesting submissions in relation to the LCM and the information that was available at that time, and has received 4 substantive submissions which have been outlined in the draft committee report. The draft committee report is at page 3 of...
Chair, it's at page
Yes.
33. Sorry, there's
33.
3 missing there.
And the clerk will give us a wee bit of an overview of the report, and then if there's any questions or comments, then we can take those.
Chair, the LCM report is very similar to what members will have seen on inquiry reports of the old style and bill reports. So it begins in all the sorts of ways members would expect with the powers and membership. In terms of this LCM, it's been described by the stakeholders as a technical LCM, and the 4 stakeholder groups that responded, none of them had any issues with this. They were content that this is useful and necessary in the current corona environment. The report itself is, again, following a pattern. So the bulk of it sets out what the bill does. It then highlights what the areas that impact directly on Northern Ireland are. Obviously, this is a legislative consent motion, so it's dealing in matters that would normally be devolved, but it makes sense to do on a Westminster basis, because that then legislation is overarching and it fits in with existing coronavirus legislation. The report also reflects the comments made by the 4 stakeholder groups and comes to the conclusion that members need to consider that the committee is content with the legislative consent motion going forward, and that the report ultimately reflects that. If I take members through the opening paragraphs to paragraph 18 are just a bit of background on what the bill does. 19 through to 27 is really just background on what the clauses do specifically. Then 28 onwards gives the provisions that are relevant to the legislative consent motion, i.e. what directly affects us here. And then moving on from that, you have 29 is the human rights and equality, and the bill is considered through legal advice compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. And for us, there have been no equality issues raised with any of the Section 75 groups. The financial implications are that this does not necessitate any cost to the public purse, which is always worth noting. Regulatory impacts. A full assessment has not been done, as is the case with coronavirus legislation. It doesn't go through the normal process. So the initial findings and the findings locally are that, yes, this is fit for purpose, that it doesn't contravene VERES, and that it's well within the law as set out already. That it protects the business community here and members of the public from individuals who have demonstrated they are unfit to be concerned in the management of a limited company, and that the company going out of business does not stop them from being disqualified as a director, which has been the case previously. So people would declare bankruptcy and reappear again as a director. This closes the loophole, if you like, in that legislation. Ministerial view, paragraph 32, is that the Minister agrees that in the interest of establishing a disqualification regime that is appropriate and fits with our neighbouring jurisdictions that this is legislation that needs to come forward, and that the Department and Executive is content that Westminster legislates on our behalf in this matter. Then the committee consideration at paragraph 33 onwards is discussions the committee have had and correspondence from the Minister, and then 40 onwards is the summary of responses from our key stakeholders. Conclusion is paragraph 44, and I'll just read that one out. On the basis of the very limited time available to the committee to scrutinise this legislative consent motion, and members are aware legislative consent motion reports are turned around in a very short space of time, 10 working days, and bearing in mind the Minister's view that it's necessary for the legislation to be undertaken by the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the committee supports the bill in enabling the Department to investigate the conduct of company directors, to include former directors of dissolved companies, to commence disqualification proceedings against them where public interest criteria are met, and to seek compensation where their conduct has caused loss to creditors. Paragraph 45, but he would ask the Minister engages with stakeholders where any particular issues have been raised with regard to the bill and the LCM. So that takes us, Chair, to whether or not members are content with the report.
Okay. Thanks for that, Peter. And just on the final paragraph, is that something we can also feed back to the department and ask for those two specific points?
That's what we would do, yeah.
From Newry Chamber and Deloitte, I think it was.
And Chair, the other thing to remind members too, because we've not had an LCM for a while, is that obviously the motion itself, the legislative consent motion, will be responded to by yourself and any member who wishes to, based on the report and the input we've had from stakeholders, so that again the issue of paragraph 45 would be reiterated then. Because this is largely covering an area of devolved work, the Minister would subsequently be able to amend any issues through legislation here.
And just, I suppose, the point being, you know, obviously legislative consent motions are never the ideal way to do legislation, but this is coronavirus legislation and the committee has taken that into consideration. Is that something maybe we could reflect in even our comments when we're making it?
Chair, we look to reflect that. That's pretty much a core response in any legislative consent motion, is that this is not an ideal way to do business, that the Assembly has certain devolved powers, and that it is always an issue if those are being exercised by Westminster, hence this process. So we will reflect that in the comments that you will have. It's not ideal, but coronavirus has meant a lot of legislation going through very rapidly to try and, I suppose, provide stability. This, interestingly or not, also addresses a loophole that's been there for a long time, but sadly anticipates what is likely to happen in the autumn with people cutting their losses, closing down businesses, dissolving businesses, cutting loose on creditors and so on. This is really an anticipation of that happening. Once furlough ends and other supports are withdrawn. So when it closes that loophole, it's obviously reflective of what may well come in the autumn. And that needs to be legislated for, I suppose, on a more holistic basis at Westminster, just to provide that sort of universal protection.
Does anybody have any comments they want to make?
Just one, Chair. I get that there's a gap and that this needs to be closed down, and that's very clear. The one thing that kind of surprised me was this will also apply to somebody who has used influence to encourage a director to close a business, dissolve a business without going through insolvency.
Chair, where that comes from is, I'm going to think about how I say this diplomatically. Where dissolution of a company, where declaration of bankruptcy is used as a tactic or device, this will also close that loophole where there's no comeback at the minute if that is a tactic being employed professionally by those who should be advising better. And again, that also infringes on law where advice is being given to that effect. This closes that loophole, and it means now there will be I suppose the right word would be sanctions. Sanctions, yes.
Yeah, my only concern, Peter, is, well, if I was a professional advisor and I was giving that advice, it certainly wouldn't be on paper. And then I'm thinking about if I'm a director who's unscrupulous enough to just dissolve the company and shed my creditors, don't care about you, and I'm transferring all my assets into a new company, I might be malicious enough to say, oh, well, I was advised to do that
Chair,
by a named advisor.
the protection for that is that that would all have to be, advice would have to be produced. There's a, what's the phrase? There's a minimal level of evidence required for prosecution in these cases or fulfilment of the legislation in these cases. So that would all have to be there, which, as you say, is probably not going to be easy to find. Advice like this is not something you will generally seek to put down in writing or paper, but it's really just seeking to close the gap where it already exists. I think that the department in London doesn't expect that those people, those people who provide advice, are likely to be caught in any significant numbers, but it's for those that they can, and it's, I guess, issuing that warning again that this is not legal behaviour.
Yeah, I guess I'm not objecting. I'm just thinking it's messy.
I think, Chair, again, it's reflected in the comments that had been made by the department, the parent department, Bays, that this would go through a very different process if it wasn't COVID related, and would have been done over a much longer period with much greater work put into being an awful lot tidier. What I suspect is this will be rethought and repackaged further down the line. And as I said, the Minister will be able to refine this because it falls within her competence or whatever Minister's competence.
Thank you.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Just in relation to the rethinking of the legislation at a future date, is there a sunset clause, and will it require primary legislation to change it?
Chair, no, not in this. It's because it closes loopholes. It's not necessarily seen as requiring a sunset clause. So how can I put this? It's not like some of the coronavirus legislation, like the health regulations and so on, that will fall away once they are no longer necessary. This is doing something that's necessary, but coronavirus is the reason why the usual process has been short-circuited. So this will evolve at a future date, but it's not got a sunset clause. But what the department in England will have to do, because it's been coronavirus related, it's challengeable beyond the coronavirus period. When we no longer have an officially declared pandemic, this legislation's title effectively does what it says on the tin, so it would no longer be easily enforceable. It could be legally challenged because it's specific to coronavirus. So further legislation will have to be brought. The ideal would be that that's done locally. And that would be what would be the plan by any kind of economy minister going forward. Because this, as I say, it's not got a sunset clause per se, but I suppose the sunset clause is it's coronavirus related and therefore would be open to challenge beyond that period. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so are members then content? So, Peter, what do I have to do? So,
Chair,
there's no proposed amendments other than reflecting in the comments, and perhaps if we reflect the points about it being related to the pandemic, and that we anticipate that there will be further legislation required, and potentially there may be things that people want to look at in more detail at that point.
Chair, we'll bring that to the motion. So what I would propose to do, Chair, is circulate your draft speaking note to the entire committee, so the members are aware of what's being said, and it also means members, if they choose to, can comment on particular issues during the motion debate. This particular more technical style doesn't generally get much comment, but it does mean members know what the committee's said in its report, and therefore know what you'll be saying and can say something else or say something more specifically.
Okay, so then are members content with paragraphs 1 to 43 of the draft report and the conclusions of paragraph 44 and 45?
Thank you.
And then just to seek members' agreement for the report to be published on the committee's webpage and issued to all MLAs prior to the Assembly debate, which is scheduled for the 28th of June. Okay. Thank you, members. So we're going to move on then to item number 6, which is the departmental written briefing on the skills strategy consultation. At page 61 of your pack, there is a memo from the department indicating the consultation on the strategy will last 12 weeks, including online stakeholder events. Have we had a list of those or anything yet?
Yeah, Chair, we have 27, and we'll bring, we'll circulate information to members for next Thursday's event. So I think we've had, Tommy, am I right in thinking we've already had nearly 20 responses, or 15?
We've had 15.
15 responses? To have declined. So
we'll send a reminder on Thursday.
we G up the others tomorrow, but I would expect a fairly good turnout for that. And those that have declined, it's specific reasons of diary clashes. So we'll have all the papers for that out to members in the Friday pack, and we're timing it again for 10 until noon Thursday next week, with members joining from 11 until noon, following the round table discussion.
Maybe you want to just tell Mike.
Yeah, Chair. The micro inquiry is basically it's a foreshortened inquiry process. You'll recall from other committees, inquiries lasting months, nay years. We haven't really got that level of time in the short period left in the mandate. So the committee has developed a model of micro inquiries that are based on either forthcoming policy issues from the department. So, for example, prior to the energy strategy coming, the committee did a micro-inquiry into what should be in the strategy. Same with the skills strategy, and we also then did a piece on what our macroeconomic issues are that would then inform the committee's scrutiny of both the Economic Recovery Action Plan and the 10X Economy suite of papers. So this is a continuation of that model. The one next week focuses on the High Street Stimulus Voucher Scheme, and the 10X first paper, Overarching Innovation Vision. So it's basically 3 questions that stakeholders will discuss in roundtable groups and then come back together at 11. That starts at 10, they come back together at 11, when members will be present for the feedback. The feedback informs a short report that the committee can consider, talk about, amend as however they wish. Then that will lead to the committee bringing a motion for debate in the chamber. It allows us to bring the issue into the chamber within weeks rather than months, and means it's very much more live for stakeholders, and we actually get that interaction of stakeholders rather than the procession of people separately, and stakeholders hear what each other, each other's thoughts on this. So it's worked pretty well, and it allows us to get things turned around quick enough to have a committee view and a committee position before the actual consultation or policy comes out, so that members are already informed and know what stakeholders are likely to want from a strategy. So you'll see that when we go on to the stuff here about the skills strategy consultation. So the one next week, we do it via Zoom, because that's still our best medium for the sort of round table discussion, breakout rooms, and just coordinating the whole thing. And we're supported by our outreach team to do it. But yeah, I think members have found it very useful in terms of and
feedback has been good from them as well.
Stakeholders. It's that to our commitment. They're not having to write lengthy pieces for us. They're not having to wait weeks or months to come and present. So it's a bit instantaneous, I suppose.
One of the things that we've been told by our various stakeholders at the minute is that there is consultation fatigue, because there's so much going on with Brexit and with COVID, and that as representative groups, that they find it difficult to keep on top of all of that. So this is kind of a shortened version of a consultation that's really live, and it seems to work quite well.
Yeah, it eliminates that need for them to write lengthy papers and for us to process over a period of months. It's been faster turnaround. Usually the committee's default response in the past has been, right, there's the skills strategy consultation, now we'll do an inquiry, whereas this means we can preempt that.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, so then page 63 of your pack, there's a press release from the department regarding the consultation. At page 66, the consultation summary document with the full-length version then at page 81. Then 6.2 at page 52 of your table papers is the report from the committee's micro-inquiry into what stakeholders would have liked to have seen in the skills strategy. So Peter's going to go through the commonalities between the actual published strategy and the committee's report and highlight any differences that are there as well. So.
Chair, it's me again. This will be unusual for members, and I assure Mr Nesbitt that this is not normally what happens. We do have witnesses come, but today's just been the way this has worked out. So what I'll do is I'll flag up what happened in the skills micro-inquiry first, so that members can be reminded of that before we look at what the consultation's looking at. So the event we held for the skills strategy micro-inquiry was in January and based on 2 questions. What changes to institutional design, collaboration and delivery of skills are required to ensure our workforce, including the unemployed, underemployed, people with disabilities and economically inactive, can move into well-paid work which meets the skills demands of local companies now and going forward? And the second question, what measures are required to support continuous skills development across all age groups and abilities and to ensure access to lifelong learning opportunities that will improve lifetime earnings, pension contributions and increase productivity? So those are the 2 questions put into the round table groups. Obviously the stakeholders are seeing those well beforehand and have an idea of what they're coming into. At the same time we were doing that, the department had commissioned a paper from the OECD on skills assessment for Northern Ireland, and similar issues were coming up out of that, and that was kind of where we based the micro-inquiry. So it was flagging up reducing skills imbalances. So we have a tendency to have skills in particular areas here. We overproduce lawyers, teachers, etc. We don't produce necessarily people where they need to be. Creating that culture of lifelong learning so that it's natural for people to continue to take on qualifications and development. Transforming workplaces to make better use of skills, so involving the workforce more, I suppose on the Japanese model of continuous feedback on our processes working, and strengthening the governance of skills policies, that conundrum of here's a strategy, and you never hear from it again. You know, it's monitoring, it's actually building it into ongoing policy. So we took that to the stakeholders and this discussion forum for these 2 questions, and there were 6 main themes came out of that. 1, supporting people to greater employability, which feeds into what's been discussed today around the levels 1, 2 and 3, where qualifications should be work relevant and understood by employers and young people. It does what it says on the tin. Defining the role of academic institutions, community learning and awarding qualifications, so clear pathways. What is professional and technical? What is academic? What is community-based learning? What do they all do? How do they relate to each other? And where does the pathway lead? Response to COVID-19 and economic recovery. The committee has talked a lot about the impact COVID has had, what's likely to happen in September, the end of furlough and so on. So really looking at a skills strategy that is capable of providing that access to upgrading and reskilling for people who are going to find themselves unemployed once furlough ends, and for moving people into the new sectors that the department has identified as high growth. Inclusive learning and workplaces. So the idea that, again, what the OECD report had highlighted of ongoing professional development, feedback from workers to management around process, everybody learning, and therefore increasing productivity, increasing efficiency and so on. Lifelong learning and a path to leadership. So that continuous development going somewhere, people not just being developed with no outlet for it and then moving on somewhere else. And collaboration, cooperation across government departments, which is probably, I would have said, a theme that has run through just about every inquiry ever undertaken in the Assembly, and one that is still not particularly well done, although hopefully with the type of programme of government and the outcomes-based assessment will get better. But skills, as members appreciate, feed right across the piece, communities, education, everywhere, and needs to be an executive led sort of strategy. So those were the themes that came out. The committee debated those and brought them to the Assembly Chamber. So if I then take you to the consultation itself, so we fortunately have two versions of the consultation in the pack, the summary version and the extraordinarily long version with all the thinking behind it. I'm going to deal with the summary version, which members will find that bit more accessible. So the summary version begins at page 65 in the pack. So as is the way with these consultations, they've got 5 steps they feel are key to interventions to deliver on economic recovery, the 10x economy vision, and so on. So those are technologies and clusters. So introducing technology to a greater degree in the workplace to, again, increase productivity and efficiency, but also trying to join up economic activity. Members are aware, and we've heard it a lot from stakeholders, and it's a key fact of our economy that we have a lot of micro businesses working in our private sector that are doing a really amazing job on their own, but it's how do you draw them together and provide the benefits that clusters offer in terms of perhaps sharing apprentices, sharing backroom functions, sharing technologies, sharing equipment, and so on. So part of this will look towards doing that. The talent element is obviously all of those skill gaps being filled, providing ongoing relevant employable skills throughout people's workforce. Also diffusing innovation and technology throughout the workplace and workforce so that it gets to every level and is accessible to all businesses, companies and people. Funding, creating more challenge funds within the skills piece. The idea being that it's not always the department that spends the money best. There will be funding provided for companies, colleges, other providers where they can offer something that will bridge a skills gap, will bridge a technology gap, will bridge an innovation gap. So it's providing that more flexible funding where you remove that element of the department says this is what it's got to be spent on, but that might actually be wrong and might not last for a full period of a strategy, which generally lasts 10 years. So it's trying to get around that and provide some flexibility. And also the idea of place. Doing what we do best here. So an analysis of where the economy here is world class in various fields of life sciences, engineering, looking at tourism, which is an industry we want to grow, looking at ICT, which is an industry we're good at but also want to grow, cybersecurity, financial services, fintech generally, areas where we know there is high growth globally, where the salaries are at a higher level than we have, and where productivity for each worker is much, much higher in terms of the value they add. Creating skills continuums into those jobs so that it's not just, well, you've got to follow this one path to get there. It's again going back to open up all those alternative vocational, academic and community paths to allow people to have that access to a variety of different growing sectors of employment. Also making sure that the commitments in the city deals are deliverable on in terms of skills, which is something the committee has talked about a lot of. Again, it's back to that idea of making sure everything aligns. So the strategies from economy align with the city growth deals that are aligning with the High Street Task Force, that's aligning with the High Street Stimulus, that's aligning with all the other suite of programmes that are being brought forward. And it's how you do that on a constant rolling basis so that your skills programming is always relevant. The department has admitted, I suppose, that static model of this is what we're going to do for 10 years just doesn't work. So this will be constantly rolling and evolving, theoretically. And that's the element that's being put out to stakeholders. So what the consultation then goes on to do is provide, and I'm not going to bore you with the detail because you can go back and look at the summary, but it provides background on the issues facing our economy, the areas that they are wanting to target as set down in the 10x economy, the digital, ICT and creative industries, agri-food, fintech, financial services, advanced manufacturing and engineering, which we're particularly good at here and can be done on that micro scale. Life and health sciences, and obviously tourism, which is seen as a growth area. But again, the committee has heard a lot of feedback from the sector on the skills shortage across hospitality, tourism generally, tourism management. So there are other policy objectives that the skills strategy will seek to address: getting more people into STEM subjects generally, particularly getting more women to study STEM, trying to work more jointly with the Department for Education through the 14 to 19 strategy, where young people are given pathways into careers that are clear and that are understood by them, their parents and employers. And interestingly, members have been talking about the Fair Start. This consultation references the other review that's going on in education, the independent review of education holistically, announced last December. That will have a bearing on how the skills strategy that the Department for the Economy brings forward, because as the committee has talked about on many occasions, the two systems can't be divorced. You can't have something separate at post-16 and something very different prior to that, or even post-18. So that's the sort of areas that it's going to cover. As I say, there's a lot of very nice graphics and schematics in the summary that members can reflect on at their leisure. And then if you go through to what the department's calling policy enablers, and effectively I suppose it's what they're promising to do or what the executive is promising to do. And there are three clear elements there that I think members will want to consider and remember. Developing better policy cohesion, which comes up again and again and again, and aligning policies so that they actually work with each other. Building stronger relationships. The department has talked a lot over the last period when briefing the committee about talking to employers, talking to the colleges, talking to unions, talking to any stakeholder that needs to be part of the picture, and investing. Members might recall that one of the papers received by the committee from the department and reflected some of the briefings talked of a deficit in skills funding stretching back to about 2010 that ultimately amounted to somewhere in the region of 460 million that should have been there but wasn't, that needs to be addressed if we're going to bring skills forward. So again, that's how to leverage money in skills investment that might have been used in other departments for programmes that perhaps did not have a growth output, if you like, or an output that would lead to further development within a community or so on. I suppose what are maybe unkindly called helicopter or parachute projects, it's there for 3 years and then it leaves. This is the idea that really that is not funding that the executive has to waste. It must lead to something else. It must feed into a strategy. And so many of those existing programmes ultimately do have a skills basis. So that needs to be made clear, and it needs to be made part of perhaps a community pathway to further learning into employment, rather than just, now you've got that skill, off you go. So you've got that skill, the next step is, and it feeds into. So that's a big promise. But again, it's part of this consultation. I suppose, Chair, what I would say is the consultation it's not revolutionary in terms of concept. It's everything we all already know, but it's seeking to put it into one strategy and then follow through with it. So if I leap on then to the very end of the long version, said he, scrolling rapidly. Actually, you know what, it's probably better if I come from the other end. You have the list of questions at the end of the consultation. So these deal with specific elements of the background paper in the long version. So you've got your questions there for strategic context. There's 3 questions for that. Are you content with the overarching strategic direction set out in, and then it names all the wonderful papers that have come out, the Programme for Government, the Economic 10X, Skills Strategy broadly, the ERAP, all the other strategies the Department has come out with, and members will also be aware that, although it's not mentioned specifically, this feeds into the education strategy and the need for Green New Deal jobs. So again, the committee has looked at this and done a fair amount of work on it, and the Department has stated within its Economic Recovery Action Plan that part of the skills piece will be creating the structures to educate people to fill those future green jobs. Do you agree to rationalise the skills landscape, etc.? Have you comments? Then Chapter 4, Strategic Goals and Policy, and there's a set of questions on that. So again, I won't bore members with going through all of those, because we are obviously on our short day and we need to leave the room at noon. So what I would say is it's there for members' reflection, but the good part of this is obviously that the committee acts as super consultee, and we'll be scheduling a briefing of the analysis of responses to the consultation. So it's running for 12 weeks. Unfortunately, obviously, that goes into the summertime, which is not always the best time, but it's a reasonable length of time, and the committee has already encouraged stakeholders to respond. So, Chair, if I leave it there, it covers the bases that were identified by the committee in its micro-inquiry. The questions also cover that, and we'll see just what the stakeholders think of it when we get the analysis of responses. And obviously the committee may well choose to do further work once it sees what those are.
Okay, Peter, thanks for giving us the overview. And as you've said, it does overlap with what our own committee inquiry highlighted. I think there's some good stuff in it in relation to the lifelong learning aspect to it, which is something obviously that came through very strongly. The need to, respond to the changing nature of our job market and skilling people for those emerging sectors. I do have a slight concern about the wording of rebalancing towards STEM. And I say that as a scientist, as a huge advocate for STEM and for women in STEM in particular. But I think that there is a slight concern there that scaling up in STEM might be at the expense of some of the other areas of learning. And I don't think that's something that we would want to see. So we might just want to get some... It might actually just be useful for us to have that briefing with the department officials and to seek reassurance around that particular issue. There's a few other wee bits and pieces, obviously, that we might want to discuss out further with them, and you highlighted the one around, for example, the skills in the hospitality tourism sector, which has been highlighted to us as a shortage. There's also like health sciences, there's a shortage of skills within that area, and there's not been particularly clear cut coming through in the strategy around, for example, upskilling of care workers to nursing, and we know that is something that has been really successful in terms of the courses Open University have done.
One of the real issues, I suppose, with this. It's still very high level. We've not seen in any of the documentation how that will work its way out. As you identify, health sciences is one of the targeted sectors, but at the minute we don't really have that perfect continuum. It's not often you turn to America for examples of best practice necessarily in terms of employment, but in America there's a continuous pathway from the lowest level of medical practitioner, what might be equivalent here to what was called an auxiliary or a healthcare assistant, right through to that often seen as the top of the spectrum, that brain surgeon. In America, a nurse doesn't just have to stop at nurse. There's an easy pathway through to first becoming a physician's assistant and then actually moving towards becoming a doctor. That's not really been visualised within our system, and that's ultimately what this skills strategy theoretically is setting up. So there's a huge amount of on-the-ground work to do with other departments to actually fulfil this. that's I suppose there's two notes of caution. How this works out in detail on the ground and money. The funding required to really put this out at the level it needs to be put out at, to really maximise it, is significant and will have to be drawn from across the executive. So it requires that reform of education to release money that will go into skills and elsewhere. So it's got that ambition, but I guess those are two things that really need to be pinned down. Chair, I think Mr. O'Dowd wants to comment.
Go on ahead, John.
Thank you, Chair. It's a continuation of the previous discussion in relation to the youth training programme. I think the skills strategy has huge potential, but I also have concerns that success is measured again in those who work in IT and those advanced industries. And I've said this before, committee, as I'm sitting here looking at my office window and I see the economic activity going on around me, and the vans and builders' vans and others who are travelling around the town, and the activities going on in some of the shops isn't at that level. But it is economic activity. Much of it is well paid. Try getting a builder to do some work, and you'll know just how well, about some of those is in relation to the rising costs of materials. But there is good careers to be had in many sectors of our economy. And if we don't train up the young people to work in those sectors of the economy, then there's opportunities being lost for many young people who may not be academically gifted, but are gifted in many, many different ways, and who can create or who can deliver for our economy. So the one word of caution I have around it is that, to me, it is focused heavily towards IT and those advanced technologies rather than a holistic look at our economy moving forward.
Chair, Mr. O'Dowd's exactly right in what he's saying. It's aimed at that. This is the shiny area that would be great to have, and it will only be effective if the 14 to 19 strategy is effective, which means creating those pathways from 14 to 19, you're professional and technical, you're academic, and you're community based. And that's where bringing this all to fruition is really heavily dependent on that input between the education and economy departments. Taking people on post-16 or post-18 to try and fix everything that may not have worked out for them in compulsory education is not compatible with this. Therefore, it highlights itself, I suppose, that an element of it being brought through is dependent on what's going to happen in education, and the two departments bringing forward that 14 to 19 strategy that reflects wider reform. And that's the only way they'll free up the money to fund this as well, Chair. So absolutely, members are really well aware of the issues on this and how so many things need to align.
Yeah. So if members are agreed, we'll seek a briefing from officials on it, and then we can discuss it out in a bit more detail with them. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on then. Do you want me to also do that, Peter, request a briefing on the analysis, or?
Yeah, we'll get that into the system now. Put that in the data readout.
So members are content, we'll also request a briefing on the analysis of responses to the consultation once those are available to us in the autumn. So,
Thank you.
okay, so we're moving on then to item number 7, which is matters arising. On page 186 of your pack, there's a response from the department to our request for further information in relation to the High Street voucher scheme. The department has stated that an economic impact assessment is currently being undertaken. Initial analysis on the multiplier effect suggests it's in the region of 140 to 145 for every pound of spend. A quality screening is being finalised. A stakeholder engagement plan is being developed. A technology solution will place restrictions on the card to ensure that it can't be used either online or to purchase goods and services outside of the North. The Minister's current policy intent is that it's for people aged 18 and over who are resident here and they will be eligible to register for a prepaid card. Obviously, we had asked that they also consider 16 to 17-year-olds, and they don't completely rule it out.
No, Chair, they use a wonderful phrase about, we're thinking 18, but we haven't ruled that out. But I would be surprised if there's an extension there, Chair. The business case has been very much on the 18-plus population, and to widen it out now might cause disruption.
And then it's anticipated that provision will be made in regulations to allow for benefit disregard, and that was an issue obviously raised initially by John about the impact that it could potentially have on people in receipt of benefits. So that it was a useful enough, I guess, response from the department. And in respect to some of the questions the committee had, obviously we're having the micro inquiry next week, the event that Peter has already discussed, and that will give us the opportunity to get a wee bit more information from stakeholders around their views on the scheme. So that's just therefore to note at this point.
Thank you, Chair.
Page 188 then, there's a response from the Executive Office to the Committee's request for further information on the issue of manufacturers in relation to rules of origin, as well as details of any engagement with the British Government on the issue. And the Executive Office states that the Economy Minister and officials are engaged with Whitehall to seek urgent solutions. Obviously, we've already had the response from DFE in respect of this, and HMRC has advised businesses should explore potential mitigations for this tariff, such as customs processes and the de minimis waiver. So if members are content, we will pass on that response to the manufacturing business who raised it with us. Okay.
Thank you.
Then page 190, there's a response from the Student Union of Ireland to recent correspondence from the clerk following our engagement with NUS, USI and the Students' Union. Peter, there's actually responses also from the Welsh and Scottish NUS.
We got all three. We got South, Scotland and Wales. Chair, I'm conscious of time, and members will want to reflect on this because I think there's more work to be done. But essentially all the three jurisdictions responding have got setups with government ministers, some of them to a really, really sophisticated degree that really we don't have any replication of here. So what I'd like to do is bring this back again for members to discuss. As I say, I'm just conscious of time at the minute, but it provides us with an awful lot of information, and I think it's something members will want to look at and potentially look to design something with the department and bring it forward. But very, very helpful. They were all really fast to come back and really, really helpful.
Okay, so are members content that we would have a slightly broader discussion on that, or does anybody want to make any comment?
Sure, I'm conscious of time, but it's called participatory democracy. And I'm at a loss as to why the Minister has turned her back to engaging with the variety of students' representatives. It's about creating good policy. You won't always agree. There's times you'll have to go into the room and disagree. That's just the nature of the beast in many ways. But when you read through those responses from the other jurisdictions, it just highlights what can be achieved when there's a willingness to do so.
Okay, well look, we will bring it back for a broader discussion, and the next item is actually kind of related in relation to student issues. There's a written briefing paper there at page 194 of your pack from Ulster University regarding the plans for semester 1 of the incoming academic year. UU states that public health indications are encouraging, and we can with increasing confidence begin to look at a fuller resumption of normal on-campus operations. UU is also in the final stages of building the enhanced Belfast campus and looks forward to welcoming staff and students to the new campus in September 2021. So that is just for members to note at this point, but it is part of that discussion around the advice that's being given to students at this point in time and what contingency is being put in place for the next academic year. Obviously, we're all hoping that we're continuing on this positive trajectory, but we do see, I suppose, some of the concerning stuff in England around the Delta variant as well, and I think it is important that we are planning for any scenario.
Chair, I think that's the caution I would put on this is obviously it arrived before the sort of news over the last week where there have been spikes in cases of new variants. And I suppose all of this, no pun intended, comes with a health warning. I know the new campus will lend itself to a lot of the mitigations, and they're hopeful that that will help. But I suppose this is all on the basis of the regulations going in the right direction, the story in terms of cases and so on going in the right direction. So there is that caveat.
Okay, so we can bring this back for more discussion. Moving on then to page 197, there is correspondence from the Competitions and Markets Authority regarding work to establish the Office of the Internal Market required by the new Internal Market Act. The CMA is consulting on draft guidance on the UK's internal market functions, which is attached to the briefing paper, and the deadline for that is the 23rd of July. So that's also for members to note at this point. And then 7.6 at page 231, there is a Hansard of the 19th of May's pre-introductory briefing on the parental bereavement leave and pay bill. That bill was obviously introduced by the Minister yesterday, so that's for members to note. And then at page 236, there's the Hansard of the 19th of May's briefing on EU exit, and if members are content, we will also share that with the EU Affairs Manager and the TEO and ERA committees.
Thank you, Chair.
And then at page 78 of table papers, there's a written briefing from the Department on June monitoring, and we have a briefing scheduled on that for the 16th.
Yeah, Chair.
So, Peter, do you just want to quickly run
Very quickly, all I
through
would
that?
say is tables are the best bit. I would draw members to the easements that the department is declaring, that some of which will be allowed to be managed, there's some 20 million, will be allowed to be managed in-house according to new rules that the Department for Finance has issued that is more flexible. But it's what I highlighted before, the department is still, and ALBs are still carrying this huge number of vacancies, and that is going to impact on all of these policies and strategies actually being implemented with proper detailed action plans. So again, there are the two debates next week. There's the supply debate and there's the budget number 2. So those are key issues that will be flagged up, and we have the briefing on the 16th. But obviously those debates are next week. So what I would suggest to members is that paper is a good reference point for the debates next week, and really highlights the position the department's in. Members will also recall over the last number of months that the department has indicated how much of its big spend this financial year will be through in-year monitoring. Some of that has been secured. The 140 plus million for the voucher scheme has been secured, but there's going to be huge spending around the skills strategy that hasn't necessarily been secured, and funding for some of the skills programmes will only be year on year, because we're still dealing with single year budgets, which again impacts massively on rollout of policies and programmes when you can't do a multi-year budget. So those are maybe issues just to flag up to members.
Yeah, and Peter, there are 2 reduced requirements for FTC. Can we get a wee bit more detail on those, and maybe if we could get that in advance of the budget debate? I don't know if that will be.
I think we have requests in for one of them, and we put a request in for the second one.
And just on that point, obviously FTC is something that's raised, consistently in budget debates, and, our utilisation of it. So if the department is having these reduced requirements, how is that impacting on the executive's overall FTC budget? And is the department trying to identify other projects that FTC could be used on if these ones can't go ahead?
Perfect, Chair. We follow up on that.
Does anybody else have any comments or anything they want to make around the budget? Okay, so moving on then to, we had to seek agreement to share the papers with the Finance Committee,
Yes,
so
sorry,
members
Chair,
are
yes.
agreed. Then 84 of your table papers, there's a response from the department to the committee's query regarding whether further education courses are currently taking place for post-primary school children who are taking FE courses as part of their studies. The department states that school pupils studying at further education colleges under the entitlement framework could return to on-site learning from the week commencing the 19th of April. So pupils who are undertaking courses in occupational areas which remain under restrictions such as hospitality cannot resume some practical activities until the date agreed by the executive to remove the occupational operating under restrictions for those areas. So obviously that has now happened. So for those courses with no practical element, online learning will remain in place until the executive agrees that further education can progress to the appropriate step in the pathway out of restrictions. College principals have been informed of these arrangements and working with learners and school partners to implement those. So that's to note. Then at page 85 of table papers, there is a copy of the trade and investment element of the 10X economic plan. This is obviously part of a suite of papers which the Minister intends to publish under the 10X plan and which was alluded to in the briefing from the officials on Brexit. The committee obviously will want to give this a wee bit more detail. Peter, do you want to give us a quick...
Chair, I'm really conscious of time, so what I'm going to suggest is we bring it back, but we also create our own schematic about what these 10Xs actually mean. So we've had 2 now, there are more to come. So I think it'd be useful to start a tracker, if you like, on what they're actually doing and how this works with the ERAP and the Programme for Government and so on. So we will devise a suitable schematic for that. Yeah.
Will we quickly do the SR? Because
yes, please.
It's the one that's
Chair,
already been debated, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So SR 2021-139, the Renewables Obligation Order Northern Ireland 2021. There's a clerk's memo at page 248. The SR itself is at page 249. The SR will bring the Norse legislation in line with British legislation, which was brought forward by BES and is being made in Westminster. The purpose of the SR is to allow participants to use their 2019 operational data instead of the disrupted 2020 data to enable them to qualify for the CHPQA certification in 2021. This applies to those who may have been affected by the adverse impact of COVID-19 and its associated restrictions on consumer demand and consequently on heat and power ratios, which may not enable them to reach the benchmark required by the standard. So we considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 23rd of March and members were content. The statutory rule is subject to draft affirmative resolution procedure. It came into operation on the 1st of June and that the examiner of statutory rules has not yet reported on the rule, so members will be agreeing to the legislation subject to the examiner of statutory rules report. So members are content, we'll put the question.
Thank you.
And that's that the Committee for the Economy has considered the SR 2021-139, the Renewables Obligation Amendment Order NI 2021, and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, members, so...
Yeah, I'm sorry, I declare an interest, Chair, as the owner of a wind turbine.
And so we're moving on then just to item... Peter, do we want to...
Let's see, Chair. We usually have about 10 minutes grace.
So do we want to do...
Let's try and see if we can get through some... we've got correspondence. We've also got...
AOB.
AOB. If we go for the AOB first.
Okay, so Mike, you had indicated AOB.
Yeah, Chair, and it's really just a point of information, and excuse my ignorance, but when we have a disastrous announcement like yesterday's from Thomson Aero Seating, do we engage with the company, with the employees, reach out through the unions? Do we ask the department what they're doing to support the company and the employees? And also, I mean, in this case, what I'm hearing is that the order book is actually very good for 2022-23. So we've got this complicated situation where they're shedding 180 highly skilled workers, potentially wanting 180 highly skilled workers in 12 months' time. So I don't have any answers. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
Chair, I strongly suspect Thomson is an Invest client. So, Chair, what I would advise the committee is to write to Invest to see what exactly they're doing in terms of supporting the company, and probably write to the Minister as well. What usually happens is we go through the Minister and the Invest NI who manage clients to ask them what they're doing. Invest may well have put money in. We'll find out what's going on there and how they're assisting the company, if they can assist the company. Also, the department, in terms of what the broader executive will be doing to support workers. The difficulty here is private sector, and this company, if I'm right, has been majority owned by a bigger Chinese company since 2016. And there are, this kind of issue is, I suppose, decisions being made out with the local economy, out with the situation here. But again, that's something we can find out through Invest. In terms of direct engagement, the committee has generally not done that. It's been done through the department and Invest. Chair, I think,
John,
yeah. Mr. O'Dowd wants to come in too.
Chair, just to be clear, Peter, I think I'm more concerned about the employees and the families than the company.
And that there should be support available. When redundancies are at that level, there's a support system that springs in to play with economy, communities, and I think there's other departments as well. But it's kind of a if you like, it's a programmed executive response,
right? Good. Okay.
That will spring into play here for those 180 workers that are facing redundancy. There were also, Chair, it might just be worth raising as well, that there seems to be a lack of clarity on where this figure is ultimately going, because there have been previous announcements from Thomson that they were going to shed more jobs, and then another announcement about more, and then this set of redundancies comes. So again, potentially through Invest, we might actually get a clearer picture of what this means. Is this
part of the 500? Or is this
or
separate from the 500?
Separate to that? Because there's been a lot of information out there about this.
Okay.
John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I would support the proposal to write to Invest in the department just to see what support there has been put in place to secure the company in terms of future contracts, as Mike has said. Unfortunately, support from departments comes in the frame of how to claim benefits, also direction towards other jobs, of course, as well, and perhaps reskilling and retraining. So it has its good sides, but also obviously people being directly claim benefits, there is a huge loss in their income as a result. But it would be interesting to know exactly the figure in terms of job losses at this Barclay, because there has been a number of announcements since the collapse of the global economy. And does it include agency workers? Because there's quite a significant number of agency workers have lost their jobs here over this last number of months as well. But everything should be done to secure the future of that company in Portadown and Banbridge, because the global economy will come back again. People will start flying again, and that the market that had been secured by Thomson's is a very good market, and also it has to be said it's a good, pays good wages and supports local families and the local economy. So everything should be done to secure the future of that plant.
And members will remember that we have already raised the issue of sector-specific extensions to the furlough scheme, and I think this is one of those particular sectors where it's going to be really important that there is that slightly longer term support available, because it is going to take slightly longer for them to come back. Gary is wanting to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to touch on your final point, obviously I support the previous comments, but I think that this does highlight the need for sector-specific support going forward. Given the fact that there's many sectors that won't recover at the same pace, the order books might look good for next year, but they need support to tide them over until that happens. So happy to support the need to write to Invest. And I think that we need to urge the department as well to continue the conversations with the UK government as a whole, because I think that a lot of the issues that are facing the sector here in Northern Ireland apply equally to the rest of the United Kingdom as well. So I would just like to make that point, but happy to support the other proposals as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. Obviously, we don't have the resources to be able to support the aviation sector here, specifically through the executive. So that is something that needs that support coming from the British government. Peter, you wanted to come in?
Chair, yeah, we have correspondence ongoing around extension of furlough, particularly for specific sectors where that bounce back is not going to happen straight away. We also have written in similar terms to the department and executive more broadly. I've had confirmation that Thompson is indeed an Invest company, and that Invest is working with the company to see what can be done in terms of securing jobs, mitigating redundancies, protecting jobs going forward, potentially a level of, we've seen this with some companies, Chair, is looking at alternative markets or alternative use of production lines. And the Department for Communities will, as members have already indicated, provide assistance to those who have been made redundant. But I think the key thing is trying to stem that flow. And as Invest says, look at, it is a very specific market, and they have, are world leaders in this. They provide a huge number of airlines and manufacturers. So it's finding a way of keeping everything going until that market picks up again. Unfortunately, the sector isn't expected to reach pre-COVID levels until 2024-25. So there are clearly issues there about addressing the need in the interim to secure jobs. So if members are content, Chair, we'll capture that in the letters that go out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we'll just move on to.
I think we probably will need to, because I know guys will be outside to come in and cleanse before the next meeting.
So we'll go to item number 11, which is the date, time and place of our next meeting, which is next Wednesday, the 9th of June, in room 30 at 10 a.m.
And Chair, we'll issue correspondence for agreement via email later on, okay? So if members are content with that, that's how we'll approach it.
Okay, thank you.
Very much.
29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.